Hello, my name is Grant Van Vranken. Today we're going to talk about my 5 times great-grandfather, William Wedgbar Underwood, who was born around 1759 in Loudon County, Virginia, died in May of 1852 around Union County, Georgia. He served in the 1st Regiment of Virginia Regulars, Continental Army. Who was William Wedgbar, alias Underwood? Well, the earliest record of him for sure says William, it looks like Wedgroof, enlisted for the war, that he was 5.5 feet high, a free mulatto, 19 years of age. He ended up getting a pension later on, so that's how we know when he was born. He said in various pension records that he was 65 in 1824, and that would put his birth around 1759 in Virginia. Also, when he enlisted, he was 19 years old. He enlisted the 19th of March, 1780 in Culpepper County. It said that he was a planter born in Loudon County. It says that he was sized up on April 27th, 1781, and that he was 5 foot 2 3/4 inch high, black or brown hair, dark eyes, yellow complexion. He served under, according to his records, Captain Shelton, Major Finley, Colonel Posey, and he also mentioned that he served under, as he put it, that he was inspected and received by Baron Steuben, and that he was going to head down south under Major Generals Arthur St. Clair and Mad Anthony Wayne. So, like William, one of the other figures central to his life early on that he probably never would have expected was being placed under the command of the Baron von Steuben. And he served under him until the siege of Yorktown, actually. He was under von Steuben then. And then after that, he was transferred under a different command. And these are 2 different portraits of von Steuben. The one on the right is later because it includes the badge of the Society of the Cincinnati. So, born Friedrich Wilhelm Ludolf Gerhard Augustin Louis von Steuben, he went by the name Friedrich Wilhelm August Heinrich Ferdinand von Steuben. And he was born in 1730, the son of a Prussian engineer, junior officer, low-ranking officer. However, he was named for Friedrich Wilhelm, Frederick William I, King of Prussia, who was also his godfather. So, I mean, his father may have been a lower ranking officer, but clearly the King of Prussia held him in high enough regard to stand as godfather to his son. And I believe that this connection would serve him very well throughout his career in Prussia. He enlisted or joined the army very young, at probably about 14, 15 years old. He was serving alongside his father with the engineers, and he served with the Prussian army until April 29th, 1763. He rose to the rank of captain. He was obviously saw some service during the 7 Years' War during that time, and he became an aide-de-camp to Frederick the Great. And he was handpicked as one of the officers that he was putting through this elite academy that he was starting, and something happened. He was abruptly discharged. The rumor that always plagued him was that he liked little boys. I don't know. He never married. He never had children. I don't believe he ever even dated, that we know of. And he left all of his property to two men who were assumed to have had some kind of relationship with him for many, many years. However, he did quite well. It took forever to get promoted in the Prussian military, even if you knew the king. Um, but he started as a cadet in 1747, and in 1762, Frederick the Great actually gave him a lay benefice, which provided him about £90 a year of income. They called it 400 thalers. And after he was dismissed from the Prussian army, he searched around until he could find gainful employment, which didn't take too long. He was picked up to be the court chamberlain or grand marshal to the Prince of Hohenzollern-Hechingen. I'm sure I butchered that. Where he did quite well and served for a number of years until 1777, and ultimately until he joined the American cause. While he was serving there, the Duchess of Württemberg, who was the niece of Frederick the Great, awarded him the chivalric Order of Fidelity, which gave him the title of Freiherr, meaning free lord. And in 1771, when I believe the principality was starting to seriously suffer financially, and probably in lieu of pay that he was owed, the principality awarded him the title of Baron. So whatever you can say about him, about his resume, he was indeed legally, officially a Baron, which is junior minor nobility, especially from a principality like that really didn't mean anything except to a military man where a title meant everything. The Baron von Steuben is an unlikely American legend. Around this time, there were all kinds of European officers who felt that they could help the Americans win the war. Like only their service could help them win. And, they would go to Congress and they demand, I want to be a general and you're going to pay me, thousands and thousands of pounds a year or whatever the hell these people were thinking, because I'm worth it and you're just a bunch of provincial nothings who don't know what the hell you're doing. You're going to pay me what I'm worth. And, honestly, we didn't have the money, so we kind of told them to hit the pavement. But the Baron von Steuben had made some very good connections over the years through his various service, and he was considered an honorable man by almost everyone who dealt with him, which meant a lot. And he had met the Comte de Saint-Germain, the French Minister of War, years before, and while he was in Paris, the Minister of War introduced him to Benjamin Franklin, and I want to say Dean was the other guy. Anyway, they met with him. It did not go well because, he told them that he wanted money and he was this baron, and they're like, yeah, okay, you're basically going to be unemployed. Nobody wants you. There's a bunch of rumors about you liking little boys. Yes, they were well aware of those rumors. And they didn't care because the one thing about him is you knew immediately when you met him that he was a military man. He carried himself like a military man. He was big, he was imposing, he was loud, knew like no English, which, was also not great considering he was trying to offer his services to an army of people who basically only spoke English. So it was going to be interesting. And so Benjamin and his compadre kind of came up with this. Okay, they lied. They bold-faced lied. There's no other way to say it. They said that he was a lieutenant general, um, and had this great military career, um, which I guess my problem with that is knowing that he did not know English. Could there have been a language barrier, except that I know that he knew French and he was in France, so there's no way that an interpreter or somebody there did not understand what he was saying. So they lied and said he was lieutenant general. However, um, he left September 26, 1777, and he landed at Portsmouth on December 1st, 1777. And he met with the Continental Congress February 5th, 1778, in York, Pennsylvania. And they worked out a deal where he would get paid when the war was over. And he was okay with that. Um, and they sent him to Washington at Valley Forge. And Washington gave him the task of observing and coming up with a list of things to do to basically help the army, and he was a godsend. But anyway, we have a soldier's impression written down of seeing the Baron arrive, and he said his impression was of the ancient fabled god of war. He seemed to me a perfect personification of Mars, the trappings of his horse, the enormous holsters of his pistols, his large size, and his strikingly martial aspect, all seemed to favor the idea. He turned the volunteers into a great army. And that is very true. Von Steuben rightly is considered a hero because he created the army that we think of when we think of the army that beat the British Empire was entirely due to him. And actually, later on, um, I want to say it's maybe Rochambeau comments to Washington when he sees some troops marching, um, that they're not British troops, they're Prussian troops because of the way they're marching, which was quite the compliment, and Washington rightly took it so. William mentioned after the siege of Yorktown that he was marched to Cumberland Old Courthouse, where he was under the command of Colonel Christian Febiger, Hans Christian Febiger, and his deputy was Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Posey. And Major Finley was there, and Lieutenant Brooke, and it was rough. It was a bad time for the army, especially for that part of the army. They were ill-equipped. They felt like nobody was paying attention to them, and they were owed, some of them, like a year's worth of pay. They went weeks at a time without any fresh meat, and half naked, half starved, and then they were ordered to march shortly after the behavior of the men had been so bad that they had to have like weekly court martials to deal with behavior. And one of the court martials was February 8th, 1782, when 22-year-old free mulatto Joseph Hawkins was court-martialed by Major Finley and 12 commissioned officers for theft and plundering of military stores, for which he was found guilty and ordered to, quote, be hung by the neck until he be dead, dead, dead. They executed him the following day, February 9th, at 1:30 p.m. as the entire regiment was paraded before the gallows to watch the execution. On Valentine's Day, they were ordered to march south to join General Greene. Colonel Posey read out the orders, and the men said, "Hell no, we won't go." And Lieutenant Brooke wrote about putting the mutiny down. He said the mutiny was forcefully put down. A sergeant was run through with Captain Shelton's sword, and Colonel Febiger ordered the barracks burned to the ground. And Colonel Febiger wrote to Colonel Davies about what happened, and he said, "I got rid of the said detachment after hanging one and whipping 73 of them, and they are well officered, and Posey informs me behave well on their march. I dismounted the officers, which has had a good effect." So William served under Mad Anthony Wayne around Savannah, arriving at Ebenezer, Georgia, April 7th, 1782. And there were some skirmishes with the British in the Creek in June of 1782, and then they marched into the city in July. By October, he was in Charleston, South Carolina, and they stayed there quite a while. And they really didn't do much the rest of the war. There weren't any major skirmishes that they were part of at that point. But at this point, this is a great time to talk about the officer he mentioned serving under, which is Colonel Posey, Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Posey, who probably doesn't get enough credit in history for his contribution, because his contribution is actually quite vast and quite varied. He wasn't just a Revolutionary War hero. And like William and like von Steuben, he kind of maybe created a little bit of his own persona because of not really wanting to say where he came from or hiding where he came from, which I don't want to say like Colonel Febiger. I don't think he ever did that, but definitely Colonel Posey, there were rumors that dogged him. I don't know if it was really in his lifetime, but it was definitely after his lifetime that people were saying he was the illegitimate son of George Washington. But what is known is he grew up right next door to Mount Vernon, and he would have been old enough to be fathered by George Washington, but the more likely he was the son of Captain John Posey, who was a very, very well respected man in his community. And Thomas does say he was born of respectable family, not of fortune. And that would fit Captain John. He was advised by his neighbor, George Washington, on many, many occasions to sell out his holdings and move west. Like, Jed, move away from there. Not that he was rich, but he would have enough to, if he sold everything and moved to the frontier, he could buy a bunch of land and start over and live a much better life debt free, is what George Washington was trying to tell him, especially considering George Washington was his number one creditor, and at one time he owed George Washington, and I think this was in the 1760s, like 700 pounds, and that was a lot of money. So George was quite nervous, and he wanted to ensure that this guy who owed him all this money was going to be able to pay. And unfortunately, John was not a very good businessman, and he bought a lot of land that he couldn't afford, and it ended up putting him in more debt. And he didn't take George's advice, and he ended up living on a little parcel that he was fighting in court over whether he owned it or not, and everything else had to be sold. So that would fit Thomas's description. And he wrote his own autobiography, and he did not say much of anything about, well, actually, he didn't say anything about his parents, other than they were respectable and they were not people of fortune. That's it. Doesn't mention their names, anything else. So an educated guess would be he is the son of Captain John from first marriage. And what I can tell you also that I think is incredibly cool is that I am related to Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Posey through Francis Posey, who I also did a video on. And so that's really neat because it connects that side of the family to another side of the family. And then, if that weren't enough, Francis Posey's descendant, Thomas Posey, served at the Battle of Point Pleasant October 10th, 1774, where another one of my family lines lost Samuel Crowley early that morning. His death alerted the army to the fact that all the Indians were there, and supposedly thereby saving all of their lives, or most of their lives. They weren't allowed to be ambushed, which they think Lord Dunmore actually wanted to happen. But what Thomas is known for is being pretty much an honorable man. He actually was considered vain because of his honor. He complained a few times because he didn't get the credit he deserved, and he and General Wayne actually had a bit of a tiff for a while. They ended up making up, and after the war, he began a political career kind of by accident because he was awarded land for his service, and he did serve 7 years in the Revolutionary War. So I mean, I think it's quite commendable. He did his time. He definitely did his time, and he ended up getting about, I think it was 7,000 acres in Kentucky, and because of his fame and all that land, he moved there and he was elected to the Kentucky State Senate and quickly became the speaker of that body. And then he was appointed the lieutenant governor of Kentucky for a while. And kind of leading up to the War of 1812, he was appointed a major general of Kentucky Volunteers. And I believe he ran for governor of Kentucky and lost. So he moved to Louisiana and somehow got appointed to be a U.S. Senator for Louisiana for a year. And then from there, hopscotched over to become the governor of Indiana Territory from 1813 to 1816. And he succeeded William Henry Harrison as the governor. And he was apparently not well liked as governor of Indiana, the territory, and he ran when it became a state to become its first actual governor. And I was reading somewhere that he had met publicly with Aaron Burr, and that could have cost him the election. He didn't lose by a whole heck of a lot. It was like 40% to 60% or 45 to 55, something like that. It wasn't too lopsided. But anyway, he wrote to the government, various people in the government, asking for another position because he was kind of in financial dire straits. Like Captain John, he was never all that secure. He made you know, bad decisions. Well, not just bad decisions, but he was also away from his wife, so they had to maintain two households, and it was expensive, and he was on a government salary. And so I did read when he was the territorial governor, he was paid $2,000 a year for that gig. And then he negotiated to become the Indian agent in Illinois from 1816 until his death, and he died March 19th, 1818. And March 19th is also the date that William Wedgbar Underwood joined the army. But Thomas Posey is my third cousin, 8 times removed. So, long time ago, we share a common ancestor. But I found this really awesome quote that he wrote, and it says, "I have grown old in the service of my country. I have served as a war chief in time of war, and have served in time of peace. I have seen and experienced a great deal of the transactions between man and man, and can give you good advice. The time has come that men are wiser, more enlightened, have great experience, and know more the Great Spirit than formerly." He said that November 22nd, 1817, to 760 Indian chiefs and warriors assembled outside Fort Harrison. And he was quite successful negotiating with the Wea and the Potawatomi, and unfortunately he was old by this point, and he ended up getting typhus fever, and he died at Shawneetown, Illinois, 1818, March 19th. One of the neat things that I had discovered was that Colonel Febiger and Colonel Posey apparently were very, very avid musicians, not themselves, but they had musical ears and they'd like to hear it. And Colonel Febiger apparently recruited Peter Sheldon specifically for his to be in his unit, um, and he was a fifer. And along with the drummers, they would signal the troops to assemble, to retreat, to reveille, to eat. Um, and when they were marching, it was something to pass the time. As Americans, we don't necessarily think of that as much as per se when you watch the British do their military pageantry, I guess is the right way to say it. They always have, their musicians, and they're awesome. Uh, our services do have musicians, and they are quite gifted as well, but we're not quite as well known for that anymore. In Williams' pension file on the left here, it says, "These are to certify that the bearer hereof, William Wedgbar Underwood, or William Wedgbar, a soldier in the 1st Virginia Regiment, having faithfully served the United States from the 19th of March 1780, and being enlisted for the war, is hereby discharged from the American Army, given at the War Office the 30th of July, 1783. And apparently he kept that. Most people did not have that I've researched on my own. They said I've lost my discharge, but apparently he kept his, and that's amazing and awesome that he did. Um, and I found in the records that he was paid $20 for February, March, and April 1783. Like it said, he was discharged July 30th, 1783. And then on August 9th, it stated he was paid £18, 5 shillings, 9 pence for the balance of their full pay agreeable to an Act of Assembly passed November session 1781. The day after he was discharged, he received this 200-acre land warrant, which he ended up selling because, well, as we'll see, he ended up in dire straits for pretty much the rest of his life. One of the reasons why I think William had such a rough time the rest of his life is because the man he had too many children. That's all there is to it. We know of children with at least 3 women. Um, we know he married one of them for sure, because there's a record of it. The other one, apparently, she went by Underwood, but we don't know. She was apparently a Cherokee, and she bound out herself and her children while William was still alive. So I'm not quite sure what was going on there. Um, and my line is apparently he married a lady named Mary Eastridge somewhere around 1790, and with her he allegedly had Samuel Fielding, Elijah, Enoch, Jesse, who's my line, David, an unknown girl born about 1809 that he mentions in his pension, and then William, who is also mentioned. David, the unknown girl, and William are all mentioned, not by name but by their age, in his pension file. And then through various legal documents relating to Annie and some grandkids who actually applied to get recognized as Native Americans, the children assigned to her are Wesley Barrett, maybe Lewis, Bennett, Joel, Elizabeth or Betsy, and James. And then his final wife, or partner that we know he married, was a woman named Margaret. We always said Wilson, but then after William died and after she died, her 2 children with William that were still alive, and then 3 or 4 of her children from her first marriage to Wilson applied to get whatever was remaining due to her as a pensioner, being the widow of a Revolutionary War vet. And the 2 children that survived from their marriage were Thomas Jefferson and Nelson. Columbus and Joseph apparently died before 1860 or so. On October 17th, 1824, 65-year-old William Wedgbar, alias William Underwood, went into Haywood County, North Carolina court and gave a deposition in support of his claim for a Revolutionary War pension. He stated that he had a 55-year-old wife who was, quote, infirm and in a consumptive habit, a son near full age, a 15-year-old daughter, and a 10-year-old son. He also stated at that time that he was pretty destitute. He stated he had contracted for 50 acres of state land for $75, had only paid $9.75 of that, and the state refused to give him title until he paid the rest of what he owed. He stated he owned 1 nag worth about $40. I assume he didn't mean his wife, but 2 cows and calves worth $20, 2 beds and furniture worth $15, kitchen furniture worth $7, some poultry worth $6.50, some working tools worth about $7, and the grand total worth $89.50. And then there's a couple records relating to him being in debt. Um, the one on the left below shows him signing over land as collateral on debts he owes. I believe he ended up losing that land. And I found another record where he sold everything he owned because he was in so much debt. And he apparently always lived on the brink of poverty. This is an indenture with the High Sheriff of Wilkes County detailing debts that he owes and that they're going to take his property and sell it. The one thing that did save William, literally, was getting his Revolutionary War pension. He was awarded his pension on May 24th, 1825, backdated to April 6th, 1825, at a rate of $96 per annum, which is $8 a month. And his first payment, September 4th, 1825, he ended up getting $39.73. And he hung around North Carolina until 1847, when he appeared in Gilmer County, Georgia, in court stating that he had moved there due to his advanced age and that his children were going to help take care of him. And he asked that his pension be moved to his new location. And there's, I want to say, 3 or 4 different dates listed in the pension file for when he died. I think there's like the 4th of May, the 9th of May, the 20th or 30th. Anyway, I don't remember all the dates, but I just state he died in May of 1852 because they all state May of 1852. And I believe there's even record of him getting paid, his pension getting paid through May of 1852. And then Margaret, his final widow, applied and was granted the same amount, 96 per annum, starting February 3rd, 1853. And she collected her pension until 1860 when she died. And as I stated, all of her children sent a letter asking for whatever was due to her as a pensioner, as her heirs. They wanted it left to them. And William collected his pension for 27 years and 1 month, which was quite a long time. And I believe that's probably why Margaret married him, was he was a Revolutionary War pensioner, guaranteed income. Yeah, they'd never be rich, but they'd never be like destitute ever again either. And he helped raise her, I think, 4 children from her first marriage, and they had 4 of their own, even though 2 would only survive to adulthood. But I think about William and the life he led, and it's just crazy to me to think that a couple of his children were ministers. My direct ancestor, Reverend Jesse Underwood, was a Baptist minister, and he always went by white. All of the pictures of his children that we have, of William's grandchildren, they all look white. And like it said, he was yellow complexion, so I would take that to mean he was very light skinned. We might call it, I don't know, cappuccino or whatever that is. But we know he was free at age 19 when he enlisted, and That's all we know. We have no idea who he is, where he came from, why he used an alias. Um, a lot of people said that it was probably because he was illegitimate, and the Wedgbar or Wedgroof or Wigbare, whatever you want to call that name he enlisted under, may have been his mother's name, and Underwood could have been his father, or vice versa. We just don't know. Um, what I do find very interesting is, why didn't he have to explain that to get his Revolutionary War pension? And the thing I think kept him from having to do that was probably the fact that he had his original discharge all those years later. I think that is what saved his bacon. And I would imagine, being a free man of color, he recognized just how important that piece of paper meant, because it stated that he served over 3 years in the Continental Army. So if anyone ever gave him crap, he could just be like, well, bam! So the one thing I do know is he seemed to have lived a kind of hard life, always on the bottom edge of destitution. I mean, it wasn't to the point where he couldn't own land, because he clearly owned land more than once. But he was always just one more kid or one more disaster away from being out on the streets. And I just, he's one of those ancestors I would love to sit down and talk to, because of the people that he met in his life, that he served with, the things that he witnessed during the Revolutionary War. We don't like to talk about the fact that our Continental Army was barely held together on numerous occasions. It was in outright mutiny over no pay, no food. Um, and the politicians did their best to provide what they could, but the British were making it very, very hard to provide, with blockades and, cutting off trade with the mother country. So everyone sacrificed. Everyone sacrificed, and William was no exception. And he was recognized for his service later on. And I'm damn proud of his service. And I just think what he must have thought in his final years in the early 1850s, looking back on the fact that he was at Yorktown and saw Cornwallis surrender. I mean, that is just amazing to me. And he would have been there with another one of my ancestors from North Carolina, Abraham Davidson, who I also did a video on. So I'm very, very proud to be descended from men who really sacrificed. And everything you read about what they went through, there is no other way to describe it, because they weren't just there for the money, because oftentimes there was no money. They weren't there for the food, because oftentimes there was no food. They sure as hell weren't there for the clothing, because a lot of times they were half naked. So these people were there because they saw and believed in something greater than I think even they imagined was possible. And all I can say is thank you. And I will do my part to ensure it's never forgotten.